Hello, book lovers, and welcome to another episode of Authors Love Bookstores from a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I'm so happy to be back here with you today. Today, for our 102nd episode, we are traveling to Pasadena, California, and we are joining award-winning young adult novelist Robin Benway and Carrie Custer of Vroman's books. Robin and Carrie, welcome, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun. This is great.
We're thrilled you're here. For those who don't know, for those few who don't know, Robin Benway is a National Book Award winning and New York Times bestselling author of what is, as of yesterday, are 7 novels for young adults. Her books have received numerous awards and recognition, including the PEN America Literary Award, the Blue Ribbon Award from the Bulletin for the Center of Children's Books, ALA's Best Books for Young Adults, and ALA's Popular Paperbacks for Young Adults. Her 6th novel, Far from the Tree, won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature, the PEN America Award, and was named one of the best books of 2017 by multiple publications, including the New York Times. Her newest book, A Year to the Day, was published yesterday. Robin, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It feels so good to have a book out again after a few years. So yeah, yesterday was very special. It was awesome.
Well, Far from the Tree, it was one of my all-time favorites. I love that book, and I am genuinely a fan of your work. So I've really been looking forward to talking to you. Before we dive into all of that, though, I want to talk about Vromans, and I want to ask you why you chose Vromans as your beloved independent bookseller.
I have done pretty much all of my launch events for all 7 books at Vromans. It was my neighborhood bookstore even before I lived in the neighborhood. I love going there. One of my favorite things about especially independent bookstores is the staff picks wall, and theirs is my favorite. It's massive, it's huge. They have all different kinds of books, all different kinds of opinions. Their children's section is wonderful. I go Christmas shopping there every year for my family. I pick names off the Christmas tree to donate to local, the community. I just feel like when you walk in there, you feel like you're in a true neighborhood bookstore, and you see people you know from the neighborhood. You see people you don't know that you get to know. It's just when you walk in, you kind of feel like you're at home and like exactly what you want a bookstore to be. So yeah, they've been my favorite for many, many years now, and many other people's favorite as well. So.
Yeah, Carrie, I believe that Vromans is the largest indie in Southern California, I want to say.
It's one of the largest, yes.
One of the largest. You manage the children's and YA department, is that correct?
Correct.
I wonder if you would say a few words. I mean, Robin, as I said in the intro, won the National Book Award for her last book for young people's literature. She is certainly one of the most widely read and respected young adult novelists out there today. I wonder if you would just say a few words for us about young adult lit and what you love about it or what you find special about it as a children's book specialist.
So I've worked with books for quite a few years. I've only been at Vromans for 1 year, but I think YA lit has changed and is continuing to change even in the last few years. I think we're seeing it become more diverse, which is great. With the initiative of We Need Diverse Books, that has really helped. And so we're seeing the books themselves become rich with different characters and different experiences. We're seeing more LGBTQ YA lit, which is great, and it's just growing. It's continuing to grow, which I love.
Yeah, a lot of the people who watch our show are themselves writers and aspiring writers, and so we are always eager to talk market and craft, and so we will jump into some of that market stuff with the YA scene. But before we do, I just want to make sure everybody in the audience is up to speed and know what we're talking about with A Year to the Day. As I said before, A Year to the Day launched yesterday. The launch event was right there at Vromans, which is wonderful. Writing in the New York Times yesterday, novelist Nina LaCour says that Robin Benway upends the structure of a traditional grief novel, writing in reverse chronological order, away from a fragile acceptance and toward the initial life-changing tragedy. She says that Robin's tenderness towards her characters and their grief permeates the story. Robin, so many things to ask you, but first, will you just tell our viewers a little bit about this book? Can you give us the elevator pitch for anybody who's missed out?
Absolutely, yeah. A Year to the Day is about two sisters, Nina and Leo. Nina is older, and they're driving home from a party one evening with Nina's boyfriend, Eve. The three of them are in the car, and they are hit by a drunk driver. They themselves are not drinking. They're hit by a drunk driver. Nina isn't wearing a seatbelt, and she is killed in the accident. And the book begins a year to the day after the accident, and we slowly go backwards throughout the course of the first year of Leo's grief to find out what happened that night, because Leo, who is sort of our narrator in close third person, doesn't remember the accident. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to explore the idea of grief, but also how it unfolds over that first year of grief. Like, I know in my own experiences in grieving loved ones, that first year is so difficult because you don't know what to expect, like on birthdays, on holidays, and we talk about the 5 stages of grief, but they hit you in all these different ways, all these different times. And by being able to tell the story backwards, I was sort of able to explore how grief isn't linear and how there isn't a straight trajectory from disbelief to acceptance. And yeah, and I just really wanted to kind of look at that and also explore like what happens to the love we have for people when they're no longer here, and what happens to the love they have for us when they are no longer here. And I did my best to explore those things. So.
Oh, I mean, Sam, I think it's it's an incredible hook, and I think it seems like a book that is sort of on a familiar theme, but told in a unique way. Here's a question I'm sure you've already gotten tired of answering. How did you come up with the idea of doing the reverse chronology?
I really just wanted to play with structure a little bit. And, I was coming off at Far From the Tree, and I took a couple years off after Far From the Tree just to kind of enjoy the experience of that kind of success. You don't always get that experience in publishing. So I really wanted to enjoy it, kind of catch my breath a little. YA moves so fast. You feel like you're always publishing a book. So I just thought, let me play with structure a little bit. I felt like I had a little bit of goodwill, from Far From the Tree, and I had the time to sort of experiment. And I wrote it forwards, but every chapter that I wrote, I made the first chapter of the manuscript. So the very last chapter I wrote was the first chapter of the book. And so I kind of thought to myself, well, if this is a disaster, we'll just reverse all the chapters again and make it a forward book. And, that was an experiment gone wrong. But, fortunately, we were able to make it work. Editing was tricky, and the copy edits were tricky because you're like, wait, what day is it? When did this happen? How all fits together. But yeah, it was something that I've never done before. And I'm very, very grateful that I was able to, I don't know if I pulled it off, but to do it, just to be able to have that freedom from my publisher to be able to try something like that. Yeah, it was an adventure.
Oh, yeah. I had that thought. I thought that, your continuity editor, I hope, received a nice bottle of wine or something like that.
I thanked the copy editors profusely in the acknowledgments. Yes.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. A little bit of a broader question for you, Robin. You write this sort of contemporary, realistic, very literary young adult literature. Far From the Tree won National Book Award in 2017. That was the year that I wrote my first young adult novel that was actually published, and I certainly looked at your work as sort of the very emblematic of the way that I hope to write. But you write in a way that I think is a little bit different, though, from the way I write, the way that many other sort of well-known young adult novelists write, John Green and people like that. As you mentioned, you do write in a close third. And so much of young adult lit is, what an editor might call very voicey. Is oftentimes in a first person. I think that, writing in that young first person immediate voice is a hook for many writers and readers, that sort of feeling of climbing into the 17-year-old brain and taking it for a spin. And the question that I had for you is, you're writing about these topics, about grief, about family, about these, in many ways, very mature, timeless topics in what's a very literary voice. Why do you write YA? Why do you choose to write about adolescent characters and adolescent scenarios? What is the draw for you?
Just purely as a human being, I just remember that time in my life so clearly. I always say that it's very easy to romanticize being a teenager. You look back and think, oh, I was free, I had my car, I had summers off or whatever. And then when you're younger, you romanticize becoming a teenager, like being able to go to high school and drive a car and all of that. I feel like as a writer, that time is so ripe for mining, for stories, and especially like you said about grief and family. I feel like when you're 16, 17 years old, that is when you start to realize that your parents are not just authority figures, they're human beings. As you're growing up into an adult, you're looking at the adults in your life with very new eyes. And that can cause a lot of conflict between not only parents and kids, but siblings and how you're growing up and going out into the world. And so just as a writer, I just love to mine that. And my earlier books were a little less serious, which I loved writing. Audrey Waite was about music, and I wrote a spy series, and those were easier to do in first person because I wasn't trying to mine such difficult topics. But as like For Far From the Tree and For A Year to the Day, my characters are sort of mining their grief in a way that's hard to access in a first person way because they don't even know how to explain it. But using that third person voice, I'm sort of able to circumvent them and get into their head a little bit differently than if they were telling us the story, their way.
That's right. That's great. And yeah, I mean, you do it so well. And I mean, I think sort of part of what you're speaking to is this sort of like magnetic pull of that time of life. And I mean, I think so many of us sort of feel that way. I mean, I always sort of say like 17 was the longest year. Like it just kind of kept going for like a decade. And, I mean, and sort of every time I sit down to write, no matter what I mean to do, I always sort of wind up going back there because there's so much material, there's so much emotion.
Yeah.
Carrie, we've sort of touched on the issue of sort of the YA market and sort of YA as a genre. And you said a little bit before about the ways in which it has changed over the last couple of years, the increasing diversity of voices. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you see happening in YA, what you see being kind of hot in YA right now, where you think the field is going. So sort of any thoughts you have about what's happening in this genre?
So for us at Vromans, we're definitely seeing hot titles that have been adapted into television streaming platforms. So something that's streaming, it's just like definitely word of mouth, because we ask, where did you hear about this? Especially a title that hasn't been on our radar in a while. Things are resurging. So book talk has been something. When I ask people, my young readers especially, where did you hear about this? Some of them are like friends, but a lot of them are seeing things on book talk. And so they're coming in and asking for those. And I think that trend is probably not going to go away very soon. And then again, like just with things that are being adapted, kids want to read what's being adapted and what they're seeing on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for anyone who's listening, Robin's work is very cinematic. So it's off in that direction. Reminder to the audience before we go on, we are here to support independent book selling and specifically Vromans. We've been dropping links in the chat the whole time. But for all of you who are with us live now or watching this video in future time, please support independent book selling. Follow the link to Vromans. Pick up a copy of Robin's new book, A Year to the Day. There are signed copies available at this point. We're going to be dropping more links for recommendations and support independent bookstores. Robin, with regard to sort of the YA market, I mean, it has changed so much just even in the 5 years since you last brought out a book.
Yes.
Your writing, I think, to me, has a very sort of classic quality to me, to it. It reminds me of sort of these timeless books for young adults about coming of age, like Jacob Have I Loved, and sort of books like that. do you sort of feel pressure to sort of hustle to keep up with the market, or to get out there on Book Talk, or to or to write, sort of to chase the market, to write to the market, or are you sort of at a place where you just sort of, you do what you do and that's how it plays out?
You know, I am so lucky. My first book came out in 2008. Like, Twitter wasn't even a thing in 2008. So I have been able to grow and be able to grow my career in the very beginning, at least, independent of worrying about social media. And now I'm definitely on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I joke that, I'm almost 45 and no one wants to see a 45-year-old woman doing book talk dances. Like, I'm very happy in just Instagram world, and I'm thrilled with Book Talk. I love the kids on TikTok, but let the children have their thing. So I do feel like I feel like if I did that, it would be very inauthentic to who I am as a writer. And I know with the audience that I have, they can sniff that out in a second. And I would rather be a little bit more behind the scenes in terms of the writing that I do and the promotion that I do, and be as authentic a writer as I can be. I hate to throw that word around. I don't think there's any such thing as an inauthentic writer. But for me, to not do what I feel comfortable, to do something I feel not comfortable doing, I think would not be the right path for me. And certainly not the way that I want to represent myself either. But I love, like you're saying, like Book Talk is huge. I love that. Like, I love that we're in 2022 and kids are freaking out about books online. Like, how cool is that? Like, what a wonderful time to be a YA writer and to write for kids, write middle grade or whatever people are doing. So yeah, I just feel like fortunately I've had 7 books out. I'll have a few more out in the next few years, and I can kind of putter along and do my thing and dip my toe in Instagram. And I just blatantly use my dog for marketing purposes. And that one has worked out great so far. So yeah, I kind of just do that and, just kind of hum along, and hopefully I'm able to keep doing that. And then while also supporting the creators and the bloggers and the Instagrammers and the TikTok kids that are, supporting books as well. So I'm very happy to be on the sidelines.
Yeah, your dogstagram is top notch, and we will.
He's great.
We will link to it in the chat for the dog lovers and the YA lovers. Follow-up question though. So you mentioned sort of audience. My impression is that you are one of those YA writers who is very widely read by adults. Mm-hmm. That your books, I think, probably have. I think probably, Carrie, you may have some insight into this, but I think probably have a tremendous amount of crossover. I mean, I think there are some YA writers like John Green, like you, who I think are sort of maybe shelved in YA, but are have to be at least 50-50 in terms of readership. So Robin, do you think about audience when you're writing? Do you feel like you are writing for young people, or do you feel like you're just sort of you're writing about young people, and it just so happens that the industry shelves you in a particular way?
I think you've kind of taken my quote out of my mouth, which is, I always say I write about young people, and the books are for everybody. I really don't believe that adults should read adult fiction and kids should read YA, and never the twain shall meet. I think there are such rich stories in all different forms of the genres out there that they are open to everybody. I think Far From the Tree kind of pushed me towards more adults because it's sort of almost a generational book. It examines the structure of families and parents and kids and how everyone comes together. And especially after Far From the Tree came out, I got so many emails from older people who, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, especially single moms, weren't able to keep their babies. There was a lot more pressure to place a child for adoption against a mother's will. There was much more of a stigma against being a single mother or not having a male partner. And so I've gotten so many emails from not only mothers, but fathers who are, looking for their children and identified with that in Far From the Tree. So I feel like that sort of introduced me to a wider adult audience. But I always say, like, we all kind of deal with the same thing regardless of age. We're all trying to figure out who we are. We're trying to figure out how we relate to our parents, our families. What do we want to be when we grow up? I ask myself that a couple times a year. What do I want to do with my life? What do I want to keep doing? And I don't think that stops once you graduate high school. I think if you're an evolved person, you're constantly trying to figure out what it is that you want to be and who you want to be. And I think maybe that is what attracts adults sometimes to the YA I hate to say genre, there's so many genres within YA, but I feel like that's what attracts adults to YA, because we're all kind of struggling with those same questions. Only in YA, we sometimes get to explore that a little bit more, in a little bit more of a raw fashion.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Carrie, what can you say? What are your thoughts about the sort of the, I hate to use the word consumer because it sort of sounds so corporate, but I mean, but you know, like who's buying this stuff? Like who, are Robin's books going to adults as well as adolescent readers? What's your sense of the market here?
Yes, absolutely. So we definitely have adults that are coming in, and they might not even realize that a book, they don't realize whether it's in the adult department or the young adult department. So they're sent one place or the other. And sometimes they're pleasantly surprised, and sometimes we definitely try in our department to fight that stereotype, especially if someone is surprised or uncomfortable with it. We're like, you know what, it doesn't matter. We don't care. If you like it, read it. With our younger readers, again, they just want to read, what's being recommended and what they love. And what they love about the human experience. And so that's what we're seeing.
Carrie, tell us a little bit about who you love in terms of maybe some of the books that you might have read when you were younger, that sort of brought you first into contact with young adult lit, the first books that you loved in this space. What sort of influenced you to go in this direction with your career?
So growing up, I'm definitely going to age myself, but I was into Anne McCaffrey, The Dragon Riders of Pern. It was a long time ago, but I think that was some of the most, I don't even know if that was considered young adult. I don't remember a young adult section in my library when I was younger. I mean, I just remember going to the section where Anne McCaffrey was and grabbing those books and checking them out. And reading them. I also loved Pierce Anthony for a while, liked his work. So those are some of the books that made me love reading as a teenager. And I just, kept reading from there. And I've been a lifelong lover of books. So yeah.
Robin, what about you? Books that were sort of formative for you, books for young people that you might have read when you yourself were young, that kind of, I sort of feel like some of the books that we read at that age kind of imprint on us, they kind of, are there any like that for you?
Oh, I feel like I had the holy trinity of a little kid growing up in suburban Orange County, which was Beverly Cleary, Judy Blume, and the Babysitters Club. Like those were the books. Like that is absolutely what I read. I would ride my bike to the Walden Books at the mall, hoping they had the new super special or the next book in the Babysitters Club series. And yeah, I remember a teacher said to me, "You like the Apple books," and I didn't know what she meant. And she was talking about Scholastic used to release these paper books for kids, younger readers, that always had a little Apple logo at the top. And ever since she said that, I just remember going to the library and just looking for the Apple and then just pulling that book and getting it. I'm really lucky I grew up with a mom who loved to read, who loved the library, who introduced us to books, both my parents, very, very early. Books were always in our home. So reading was something that was not only acceptable, but very much encouraged. And reading for pleasure was very important in our house. Like to find a book, my parents never once said that book's too long, it's too difficult, it's too hard for you. Like they were like, great, grab it. And, we're always there to talk about it and ask, for me to ask questions. So for me, reading was just a complete comfort as a child. I wasn't very athletic. I was not super social. I just loved to be home. I'd never wanted to go to summer camp. I just wanted to be home on the couch reading a book. And that's still basically what I like to do at this point. So. But yeah, I just remember reading those books. I remember reading Beverly Cleary and thinking, how does she know how I feel? Like, how does she know? Ramona, the way she accessed this imperfect little girl and glorious in all of her imperfections, and just being able to read that and be like, how did she know that that's, sometimes I feel that way. And I try to hang on to that when I think about writing, for writing about teenagers now. How do I want that kid to say that to me.
To say that, yeah, that's really well said.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume. I am, of course, duty bound whenever this comes up to recall for the audience how we had Judy Blume on our show during our first season. Kimberly, I'm sure, is already linking to the video in the chat, but that was definitely one of the highlights for us when Judy Blume came on to support the bookstore that she runs in Key West. So that was a lot of fun. Robin, I want to take you back. So we're talking about a year to the day because that is your newest, but I want to sort of rewind a little bit. Far from the Tree, of course, as I've said several times, but can't be said often enough, won the National Book Award in 2017. I would just love to hear a little bit about that experience. I mean, I think just first of all, I mean, I sort of feel like I'm asking that question about well, how do they tell you? Like, do they just like call you up, or do you just get an email? So I kind of just want to sort of like vicariously live this with you. But
Yeah.
but I'd also somewhat somewhat less voyeuristically, I'd also just sort of love to get a sense of what do you think it was about that book and that time that just sort of connected in that way that it did? I mean, it's a great book.
Thank you.
A very moving book. I think that there is this kind of classic timeless quality to it where it is sort of tapping into these issues around family and siblinghood and parenthood. And, I connected to it as a father. I connected to it as a brother. I mean, it just kind of, I don't know, it's rang all the bells. But I would tell us about it. First of all, just tell us about winning that award.
It was just an experience that I never in a million years thought I would have as an author. Like, I sort of had my bucket list of things that I wanted, and that wasn't even on the bucket list, just not because I didn't want it, but just it'd be like me saying I'm going to go accept a Tony for doing a tap dancing performance. Like, it's just not going to happen, So they, at the time, 2017, they changed it a little bit now, I believe. But I found out I was on the long list, which was 10 authors, because the list went up on Twitter one morning. And I was like, oh, let me see if I know anyone who's on the long list. And it was Alana Arnold and then Robin Benway. And I was visiting my mother, actually, and I started, and my mom thought, something was terribly wrong. And then within 10 minutes, we were calling people, and my phone was just getting all these texts, and it was so exciting. And I thought, well, this is as good as it's ever going to get. And then they actually called me the day they don't do this anymore, but they called you the day before they announced the finalists to tell you whether they didn't. If you're a finalist, you got a phone call. So I was watching my phone all day, which happened to be the launch day, the publication day for Far From the Tree. And I had a launch event that night at Vromans. So I got the call from, at the time, Lisa Lucas was at the National Book Foundation. And I said, well, who can I tell? And she said, absolutely nobody. And I was like, I have a launch event tonight. And so of course everybody wanted to know, how do you feel? Tomorrow they're announcing the finalists. And I was like, we'll just see what happens. Cause I knew, but I couldn't tell anybody. So that was really difficult, but a wonderful problem to have. And then, the night of the awards, I went into it just ready to have a good time. The books that year were so strong and the other authors were so fantastic that I just thought just to be in their company was an honor. Like, I was good to go. And, people say it's an honor just to be nominated, but it really was. And then when they announced the title, I always give this comparison. It's at a big room in New York. It's a big black tie event. Everyone's dressed to the nines. And I was sitting at a round table with like about 10 people from my publisher. My mom's there. And they announced my name and everybody just stood back to stand up. And I just sat at the table and I said, it felt like the tide going out, and you're just still there. And it just became a blur. And I gave a very, very long speech. I went way over the time limit because my brain was just scrambled eggs at that point. And it was just, I think, probably one of the biggest honors, because the award comes from a judging committee that's built from librarians and booksellers and other writers. And so I have nothing but the highest respect for those, professions. And so to get that award from that group of 5 people just absolutely meant the world to me. And Meg Medina, put the trophy in my hands, and I adore Meg, and I just think she's wonderful. So to have that kind of respect from her and the other 4 judges, it was incredible. And the trophy is super heavy, and I couldn't get it through security at JFK the next day. So it was very dramatic. It was a very dramatic end to that whole experience. As to go back to your question about what people saw in it, I think it was 2017. It was a year after, President Trump had been elected and our country was adjusting to that. And we were talking about immigration at the border, and we were talking about families and what makes a family. And we're still seeing that now, in terms of who are the people in your family and how do you relate to them and how do they identify and how do you identify and how do you all keep, your family's constantly being built and broken down and reinvented. And that is certainly what happens in Far from the Tree. And I think it just was something that just registered with people. I registered with me, just as the writer. I felt that book deeply. I felt all my books, but I felt that one. And it's such a glorious thing because it's just completely out of my hands, and so to have that book take off and have people respond to it as positively as they did was just, I don't know, it's that wonderful thing about the arts and a creative thing is that people can connect to it in so many different ways and interpret it in their own way. And yeah, what a gift that book was. It really was for me to be able to have that experience.
I mean, it's a great story, and the story about the tide going out. It's a very satisfying story to listen to. The only thing I will say is, if I had that trophy, every time I was doing a website, it would be like, I'd be like, oh, what's this? Oh gosh, this old thing. How did it wind up on my desk?
It is actually right here on my bookshelf. It's right there.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You're very modest to keep it off camera. Carrie, a couple quick questions for you. So one of the things we're talking about is sort of in YA, how fast things move, how fast they change. I sort of feel like all of us who are writers are kind of fumbling around in the dark, trying to kind of figure it out. Do you have some insight into what is going to succeed? Do you have some insight into what is going to take off? And do you have some insight into where the space is going?
Oh, wow.
Easy question.
So, okay, so do I have insight as to what is going to sell?
Yeah, I mean, do you know? I mean, sort of, Robin sort of talking about being sort of so surprised by the book winning the National Book Award. I mean, do you find that when a book takes off, like Far from the Tree did, like that is sort of a huge surprise to you, or do you feel like at this point you kind of have a feel for what's going to be successful, what might not be, what's going to get the awards? Have you cracked the code a little bit?
I've definitely not cracked the code for the awards. I wish, but I think just those authentic stories and the stories that really touch on what the teen is going through, what people are going through, whether it's with grief and loss, or whether it's a kid just living their life as an LGBTQ person. I think those are stories that are going to sell. Fantasy is popular. We always know that like a good fantasy novel is going to sell. So I think I think people know when the author is touching on something that's authentic, and that really takes off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Audience question for you, Carrie, about live events. So Robin was at the store last night for the launch of A Year to the Day in your courtyard. I wonder if you would just say a little bit about live events. I've been so happy to get back to live events over the past couple of months, both doing them and showing up in the audience. Live events have historically just been such an important part of an independent bookselling scene.
Yes.
Is there anything that comes to your mind as a live event that you recall as having been unusually wonderful or strange or funny or bizarre or whatever, terrifying? I don't know. What do you think of when you think about live events?
So I've only been at Vromans for 1 year. I just celebrated my 1 year anniversary. And so we just started doing live events a few months ago. Before that, I was in libraries for 18 years. Mm-hmm. So I did have my first big live event with Vromans recently, and that was David Sedaris. That was fun. It was interesting to talk to his fans, and readers that's what they were. They were definitely fans. One reader shared with me that he was being evicted from his apartment the next day. However, he dug through his boxes and got all of his David Sedaris titles that he already owned. And he came to the store and he waited in line. It was a ticketed event. However, he was willing to he waited in line for hours to talk to David. So, and David talked to every person that came to that event. And I didn't know this, but I guess that's what he's known for, is spending time with his readers. And it was a great event. It was really exciting to see. So.
Yeah, Robin, I don't know if you've ever seen David Sedaris live.
No, I've always wanted to, but I haven't. No.
Yeah, I saw him when he came to my local indie at Wellesley Books here in Massachusetts. And yeah, I mean, he's an incredible performer. He talks to every single person, no matter how long the line is. He does funny little drawings in the books. I mean, he is a unique writer in that sense. That's wonderful. And yeah, it's actually a very moving story about the man who came in those books, and it sort of highlights how important these books and authors are for people. To the audience, segueing, speaking of how important books and authors are, let's support some books and bookstores and authors by heading to the Vroman site to pick up a copy of Robin's new book, A Year to the Day, her National Book Award winning book, Far from the Tree, and anything else you want to pick up. Speaking of which, let's do some book recommendations and sell some books. Carrie, you are the professional, so I'm going to go to you first. What are you reading, or what are you excited about right now?
A book that I've read, it's not terribly new, but I really like Jordan F. Waco's Raybearer. It's fantasy, and it's a great book to read. So I would recommend that one if you want fantasy. Let's see, one for contemporary would be Message Not Found. Message Not Found is one that I would recommend for contemporary YA. Great.
We are linking in the chat so readers can pick those up from Vromans. Robin, what about you? What are you reading? What's on your...
I feel like a bad author. I haven't read anything in a few months just because I've been editing something, and it's really hard for me to write and then read. And so usually when I'm between projects, I just read as much as possible. I'm really excited to read All the Rage by Slava Tahir. Like, that's something that I keep hearing really wonderful things about. I'm excited about that. And then I actually it's not a YA, it's a book about Octavia Butler, who is a Pasadena author, who was a Pasadena author. It's A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky. It's just about her creative process. And so I have that, and it's that thing where it's on your nightstand, and I'm like, today's the day. And then of course something happens. I also have Flora and Ulysses by Kate DeCamille on my nightstand. I really love her books, and I haven't read that one yet. And then the last book I actually finished was Oh, William by Elizabeth Strauss, which was wonderful. And I told my friend that I had finished it, and she goes, oh yeah, that's a great book to end the trilogy. And I was like, the what? Like, I didn't know that it was a trilogy. So, kudos to Elizabeth Strout for making that book so easy to read, even though it's the end of a trilogy. So so I have to go back and read the first two books clearly in that trilogy, which, okay, I can do that. So.
Robin, there was a question I was not going to ask you, but I'm bumping it back onto my list. It seemed deeply cruel to ask a writer about what to expect next the day after her book. It's like, oh, so you just published another book? Fine, what's next? But so I wasn't going to ask, but you dropped in the beginning of the conversation. You teased a little bit that there's some more stuff coming up down the road over the next couple of years. So I have to ask, what can we expect?
Unfortunately, I can't actually say what it is because neither of them have been announced. And believe me, I would love to talk about, I love talking about all my books, but it's just fun to announce new things,
Of course.
So anyway, I can say that I'll have a book out in 2023 and another book out in 2024. So
wow.
So, yeah, we're back in the game. So great.
Congratulations. That is great.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been a very, very fun experience. And it's just that joy of getting to keep doing this job, over time. So yeah.
That is a lot of books. That's a lot. it's been 5 years since Far From the Tree, and you mentioned in passing that you had sort of taken some time off after that experience. I'm just curious, kind of from a writerly point of view, is that a conscious decision that you make? Can you sort of turn the tap off, turn it back on, say, well, let's do 3 books, flip the switch, and then, or do you find that you're just sort of riding the waves and listening to your own impulses, and how volitional is it?
I would say, well, I did take some time off after Far From the Tree. I spent time with my family. I had some new family members that were born, not mine, but other people's. So I wanted to spend time with them and get to know them. I was a judge in 2018 for the National Book Awards. I was the chair of the judging committee for the Young People's Literature. So I read hundreds of books that year, so I didn't do much writing that year, which was another incredible luxury to have that much to read. You don't always get a chance to read that widely in YA and middle grade and children's literature, which is, what I write. So that was an incredible experience. Loved it. But I think I am a really, really big believer in recharging the creative battery. I don't think you can go, for me, this is how I work. I can't go and go and go and go and go and not start to break down. I had books out in 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2017. And 2017 was Far From the Tree. And again, champagne problems, but it was a lot. And Far From the Tree was I wrote it during a very difficult time in my life. I kind of thought my career was coming to an end. I was sending out resumes and looking for full-time jobs. And Far From the Tree happened to hit and gave me a whole new lease on my career. So the privilege that I had was being able to take time off. I know a lot of writers who don't have another income in the house. You don't get that time. You're always hustling. And so it felt like it was a real fortunate time for me to be able to recharge that creative battery and to take a little time off. And I don't think I could have written a year to the day, especially with the backward structure, without having that time off. So,
Right.
Yeah. And then that just sort of got me back in the game a little bit, and writing that book and then being like, okay, what do I want to do next? What do I want to do next? So, and people keep letting me do what's next, which is really nice. So.
Absolutely. Who won the National Book Award for Young People's Lit in 2018? I don't know.
Poet X, Elizabeth Acevedo.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
An incredible book, incredible author, incredible person, and incredible book. So.
That must have been an amazing process, going through all of those books and bringing it down. That must have been amazing.
It was like the best book club ever, because you had 5 very smart, very well read, even before, we had booksellers, like, career librarians, authors, and to come together and just to look at books in all these different ways. I look at a book a certain way, and someone else would be like, well, what about this? What about that? What if we look at it from this angle? And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. I mean, it was probably one of the most richest times in my life as a reader, just to experience. And children's literature is just incredible. Like, it's just incredible. Picture books, what's being produced. Like, it was so much fun to pick those books and to give those authors that experience, especially coming off the heels of my experience and knowing what that meant to me. So yeah, it was really special. It was a great time.
It sounds amazing, but it also sounds very stressful, like my book club, just talking about like one book, it gets into very heated discussion. Yeah. So, I mean, I can imagine sort of trying to hash out hundreds of books.
Yeah, it was heated. It was always respectful. It was always very professional. There was never anything terrible or anything like that. We all read, we all discussed, like, everybody pulled their weight, but it was stressful. You also know you could be changing someone's career, someone's life,
right.
And you are picking a book. When we were, we can talk about this part of it. It's pretty secretive otherwise, but we were very clear that we are 5 adults picking a book about children's literature. And so we were very clear that we wanted to make sure we found a book that was accessible to so many children, so many young readers, that was respectful, and that was something that would turn them on to reading, that would either keep their love of reading going if they already had it, or maybe spark something. And, Poet X is clearly a book that is beloved by, like we were talking earlier, both younger readers and older readers. So yeah, that book is very, very special.
It's fabulous. Carrie, we have come to the last question of the show. As I told you before, that always goes to the bookseller. And so here it is. And by the way, I appreciate that you've spent the majority of your career as a librarian, so this may feel a little bit unfair, but you know, it is what it is. I mean, what can I say? You know, it's a pop quiz. You have to deal with it. Being a successful independent bookseller is part luck, part hard work, and part what third ingredient?
So I think an important part of it is great customer service,
Hmm.
and sort of to go back to library, but like the reference interview, just asking that person the right questions and getting out of the, maybe it's the parent or caregiver that's shopping for the child, and maybe it's, or maybe it's just a young adult that wants the next great read. So I think it's just having those questions to ask, so that you can recommend something that they will hopefully enjoy for years and maybe keep in their own personal library. So just asking those questions and then providing that service for them.
Great. That's a great answer. It has been a total pleasure speaking with the two of you. Thank you both so much for spending the time
Thank
here
you.
with me.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
To the audience, both the people who are with us now, people in future time, please follow the links to Vromans bookstore in Pasadena, California. Buy some books. Pick up a copy of A Year to the Day, National Book Award winning author Robin Benway's rolls off the tongue. Rolls off the tongue. Newest novel. There are signed copies at the store. Thank you for being here with us this week. As always, come back next week, same time, same place. We will be with the writer Catherine Raven. We're heading to Bozeman, Montana. First time going to Montana. Until then, please stay well and keep reading.
Thank you.